I'm not responsible.
Guys, if you are in a relationship and you're trying to get out, you can do this job the exact same way I did it the first time. Do it in the kitchen sink. Your wife will either murder you or divorce you, or your girlfriend whom you're shacking with is going to kick you out and you'll never be invited back. But the sink is a great place to do it. You got your water right here, you know, you get to adjust its intensity, which is a great thing, and you get these little fancy things so that you spray your work off and get a lot of work done. And yeah, it's just the best place ever. But the first time I did this, I lived somewhere else and it had a bigger sink. This one doesn't exactly fit. It wouldn't be the first time I've had auto parts in this sink, and you know it if you've been here long enough. But if you love your wife, or if you don't want to lose your shot with your sugar mama, you could do something like this. I didn't want to buy this thing, but I did. It's about $129 at Harbor Freight. Simple parts washer, simple contraption and mechanism. It has most everything I need, just like the sink does, except I get to make my mess somewhere else where I don't prepare food or wash dishes. So clearly I've already taken off the prop for its lid, and I've already filled it with water and pushed it in here on easy sliders because 20 gallons of water is kind of heavy. And I'm going to have to do a few things to modify how the thing operates in order for it to be the most effective thing. The sink actually is a little bit better because you can adjust its pressure. You can adjust the flow. So if using your sink could get you killed, then this would be a survival technique. You could do something like this. You just got to get the flow right. This one does 315 gallons per hour. That's too much. If you use your favorite search engine and search AC rheostat, you're unquestionably going to be directed to parts for marijuana grow ops, and they'll sell you a fan speed controller, which this is basically an AC rheostat. That's really all I needed. I don't understand the marketing why I'll say that, but anyhow, it'll be an interesting search results later. When I plug this in, I should be able to vary the speed of the pump, right? Let's try it. I mean, it makes sense to me. Just, you know, plug that thing in, and it's got an outlet right there. You plug that thing in, and you can adjust its flow right there, right? Let's try it. Whoa! See? Too much flow, man. I'm not trying to like... Yeah, that's insane. Let's turn it down. What? Yeah, it's working. Yeah, that changed nothing at all. If I take the cover off the pump housing, you can see that the pump is pretty far underwater there. It looks like down about 2 inches below the water line. I wonder if there's any change to the amount it pumps based off of head pressure. Maybe I can change how far underwater it is and change the flow rate. We'll see. That made almost no difference at all. So I'm going to try putting a washer down into this thing. I got another washer in there that's slightly larger to keep it from falling all the way in. Let's see if I can make a sort of fake restrictor. What did that do? But I still feel like I need a little bit more resistance, and you know, I got some of these things. They gotta be good for something. Let me see. Just cram that up under the pump's intake. Yeah, just nice and snug there. Put the cover back on it. Let's see. Didn't do much, but maybe after they clog up over time, it'll slow down. I don't know, that's still way too much water flow. I can't leave that alone. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll try this. Take a plastic bag, stick it over all of the intake. I'm throwing Hail Marys at this right now. I wasn't expecting the rheostat not to work, so I've got to find a new way to avoid splashing water everywhere, which I did. But in this minute of video that I didn't cut out, you can see all the other things that I tried to solve with this particular piece of equipment in case you'd want to use it for something like this. This is a flow rate about closer to what I need. I may or may not have put the entire filter assembly into a plastic bag. Anyway, I'm still a little bit rebellious. As you can see, I'm doing this here in my living room, and we got the exact same clock up here that we had before. We're on 400 grit, and I'm going to glove up because I don't want to prune up. And let's get to it. This time the technique changes. Alright, so all I do is I take the sandpaper, I start it a little bit away from the edge because we actually don't want the overlap on the first layer. We get it as close to parallel and perfect as we can, and wrap it tightly around a razor blade. Helps if you leave the cardboard wrapping on it. And you want to make sure you keep it tight on every fold. And then you pull the razor blade out. We got a tightly wadded up piece of flattish sandpaper, and this is how we're going to cover most of our ground. I'm still going to use the spreader tool. I'm still going to do that. You can't escape the putty spreaders. They're useful all the way through the job. This was just a means of making a tool that keeps working as it degrades so that I don't have to stop. How long do these last? About an hour. They start to peel and come apart and flake and go bad. Yeah. So you get to peel layers as you start wearing through the edges. What happens is the backing gets a little bit waterlogged and the edges just kind of get worn out, and it makes it really easy to tear. So, you know, you can get pretty far with it. We got about 2/3 of the way done on an area that large in 1 hour. The spreaders are critical for planing surfaces, but everywhere here we have a surface that's already planed. So instead of constantly having to rotate a fresh patch of sandpaper in front of the contact surface of a planer tool, all I have to do is just rip a tab of worn sandpaper off and keep on going. This technique is much harder on your fingertips because there's no tool between you and the part anymore, but it covers more ground faster with less juggling of whatever's in your hand. If you're not working on a surface that's already planed, then don't do this, because you're just moving the planing process to a finer grit of sandpaper. The goal of every step of this process is not just to cut through the scale quickly, but primarily to get the surface planed flat so that future steps are less work. Once it's flat, simply replacing the surface texture is much easier, far less time consuming with the coarser grits than it is with the finer ones, as you'd expect. So when I opened up this step saying, now the process changes, it really doesn't. I was just able to employ a time and effort saving technique because I'd already created a surface plane flat enough for, getting away with doing it like this. It still doesn't work everywhere, and you'll see soon that we'll be right back to the spreaders again. It's just one more way to change what's in your hand to get the job done efficiently. Just like before, the goal is still to lay down an even, consistent texture and sand all the way up through the previous pass. The light and reflections are still your guide, and no matter how much time and effort you save by changing your techniques, you'll find that on these complex shaped parts you might find yourself making and creating whatever tool or technique is necessary to achieve your objective and lay down that even, consistent texture. Whether you're wrapping it around something, folding it a certain way, rolling it up, it doesn't matter. You have to make the thing that lets you do that everywhere. And no single thing that you make will do that job effective everywhere. It's your creativity that's going to produce the best finish possible. I'm just showing you what I'm doing to overcome specific complexities on my part so that these tools are in your tool bag ready to go when you need it. You may come up with better ideas if you attempt this. Your part might even require it. Alright, we're about 5.5 hours in, and I've got something I feel like I can be proud of. It's looking really good. Got everything done on this side now, with the exception of these two spots right here, because I need to roll up some sandpaper. I haven't made anything small enough to get into that space yet. And as soon as I get done with that, we can go ahead and wrap around and start doing this side. Now that's going to get tricky because this thing isn't very deep, and that thing isn't very tall as I need it to be. So we'll probably just knock the bottom out and soak the bottom half. Yeah, I went through a whole lot more than that. There's the washer that prevented the old washer from falling down inside the pump. There's the old restrictor washer we were using on the bottom, and there's the one I'm going to use right now. It's smaller than the inner diameter of the nozzle, so we're going to use the old restrictor washer stacked on top to prevent it from blowing out. The washer restrictor worked best because restricting the intake ends up sucking air, occasionally causing the pump to lose its prime, but beyond that, the pump froths air into the stream and you're trying to see what you're doing in white water. I cycled out the basin with clean water while I was at it, but I made this change and wanted to let you know. Let's see what it does. That's about perfect right there, crystal clear water. It's not even fully primed yet. That's what I've been looking for all along. I needed about 10 gallons per hour, not 315. No more Ziploc bag, but there you go. 3 techniques, 4 if you count the one that doesn't work at all. Use whatever you need to make it do what you gotta do, but you can make it really complicated, or you can just obtain the most appropriate sized washer for the flow rate you need and keep things really simple. $129 survival tool for some people. But for me, I just wanted to contain my mess in a single thing, save a whole bunch of water versus doing this in the sink, and show you that I have enough faith in this method that I'm doing it in my living room. I haven't spilled anything yet. What does wet sanding change in comparison to dry sanding? Wet sanding eliminates the airborne particles, and that's a plus. It cleans the surface constantly as you work so you can see exactly what you're doing. That's a plus. It reduces the potential for grinding trash and dirt into the finish and distorting your texture. You know, that's a side effect of the last plus, but one that leaves you with less to clean up later. It saves some time. So it seems to cut faster. With all this, you might ask why I didn't start doing this earlier, like at 220 grit, and that's a great question. I'm glad someone asked it right on time because I intended to cover that in this video. Wet sanding is when all your pressed-in steel parts begin to rust, and they rust quickly and easily. And that's what's most significant about what happens to the part. But what I answered that question saying is mostly about comfort. Working in gloves gives you soupy hands. Working in water gives you soupy hands. Soupy skin is irritated skin. We've been at this for like 200 hours now. I delayed adding water to preserve the physical stamina required to finish this job. Soupy dried out hands aren't going to help you get there. You'll see me alternate in and out of gloves even in this job because skin needs to breathe, and the sooner you introduce the water, the less yours will. My fingerprints are barely visible at this point as it is. I don't use them to unlock electronic devices, so I can't report on how that works for any of you wondering, but the less wet your hands are while you're doing this, the longer you're going to last doing it.
8 hours and 45 minutes into it.
So, another reason to wait this long, until you get to step 4 or 5, chances are your work isn't planed anywhere near flat enough for those finer grits that we're going to be working with in steps 5 through 8. Some of the techniques we had to use in the earlier stages to plane surfaces didn't include the spreaders, like rolling up sandpaper to dig stuff out. The tightly wound sandpaper made it its own support when it was dry and could cover large areas before wearing out, but like with noodles, the rigidity of your materials change when you add water. When the sandpaper gets waterlogged, now you're trying to plane things with a wet noodle. It gets squishy in minutes. You still probably can, but it's a whole lot more tedious and it won't produce as clean of a texture as it would dry. The grit stays effective for a longer period of time because the surface is lubricated, but its substrate material that supports it breaks down many times faster. So in a nutshell, water changes your sanding media in a negative way, but it's a fraction in comparison to the positive changes that begin to occur in your work. So despite what it does to your sandpaper, the steel bits embedded in the head, or what it does to your skin, it's still physically easier and a welcome change to the process once you get to it. And so if you can tame all of your equipment and these techniques, even as your weaponry turns into wet noodles, then your green belt is just sitting there waiting for you at the end of this.
Well, I can't call time yet because I got one unfinished spot on the other side.
This is a love of labor channel. If you've been counting, we're wrapping up step 5 in only 8 minutes from when we started sanding. I know it's hard to swallow a YouTuber that you like watching getting trapped in a hole of a job like this, but to some people out there crazy enough to try this, despite my repeated warnings not to, this series is going to be gold to them. My patience, my experience with it, and the number of times I've been asked how I did it, or if I'd do it for money, is what makes this series worth making. Whenever most people see polished engine parts, it creates the same automotive equivalent as gold fever. They want it. The only way anyone ever has this is to do it themselves, because everything about it is a sacrifice. I'm trying to set expectations so those people will survive doing this job and be successful at doing it. There's a satisfaction in watching its transformation accelerated, even if you never planned to do this. People who like to leave things better than they found them and enjoy this kind of work. I'm doing my best to condense this to the pure concept and just the new information, but some repetitions required because the preparation for polishing is 98% of the work of doing it. That preparation is 7 steps long, and the fundamental technique is the same in all 7 steps, whether it's wet or dry. The water just adds a new complexity to your materials. It solves a lot of problems too, but you should be grateful for that complexity because it's going to help you produce better work.
Okay, maybe I'm a little bit responsible.
There's a continuing softening of the part that occurs visually as we go forward, but all that matters right now is the head is in a tank full of water and it's rusting, so we need to get right back to it. 13 hours for step 5. There's your stinking green belt. Now put it on, shut up, and get back to work. Step 6 is 600 grit. Step 6 and 7 techniques are exactly like step 5, but you're not allowed to stop training yet. Keep using that green belt for now. You're never going to go any farther than green belt if all you do is watch this series and polish one cylinder head. But by the time you get here, you've earned that green belt. A green belt is someone who understands and practices and demonstrates the fundamentals correctly. Green belts are potent and effective competition, but their experience is very limited. You'll be stuck in green belt because copying this example won't allow you to make mistakes, and mistakes are often your best teachers. Accidents can often lead to innovation. Brown belts win competitions only because they've attempted many pieces and failed a lot. They've experimented and they've adapted the fundamentals to fit any challenge they might face. They'll always win in competitions with rising green belts, but only because of that experience. You're learning this from a brown belt in polishing dough. I'm not a black belt. Heck, I'm not even authorized to teach you any of this. I'm a leaky brown belt whose intentions are good because he's trying to preserve the art. This art is a journey. Each attempt to polish another thing will provide you with different materials and challenges. You'll be able to see what you can improve as you complete each part, and that experience is what's going to help you achieve mastery. This is actually one of the best parts to learn how to polish metal with because of the challenges that it provides, its accessibility, and the consequences that you're going to face if you haven't creatively thought through your approach and you get it wrong. So the kind of part you start with can actually add pressure to your training. I consider that to be quality training because you're going to think more and learn more doing parts like that. I've polished dozens of things, including stuff that has nothing to do with cars, brass, wood, plastic, and even stuff that's not supposed to be polished at all. You can actually polish a turd if it's petrified. And you thought this series took a long time. Until that petrification occurs, you got a variety of coating options to pick from, and if it's fresh enough and you're in a hurry, you can roll it in glitter. Hey, they don't call me a brown belt for nothing. You won't win King of Bling by not having solutions for these kinds of things. Black belts can successfully polish factory DSM manifolds, and there's some of those out there that might be watching this because I've seen 2 completed examples in person in real life. Those guys are nuts. I quit mine because I racked discipline and all of the weapons required to defeat it. My adaptation? I bought a Magnus unit and shot a cannon at that fist fight from a long way away. It was cheaper than the weaponry, and it was a better approach for the show judges anyway. Technology and money can surely change the battlefield, but in order to change it effectively, you need to understand the fundamentals and your own capabilities first. There are black belts floating around out there whose techniques and hand-eye coordination are unmatched. They possess and have mastered an arsenal of weaponry and perform techniques to most efficiently achieve a specific result. I'm only showing you the fundamentals because they're the only thing that's going to achieve the result I'm going for. These techniques that I'm demonstrating are most closely aligned with block sanding, which only creates flat surfaces and straight corners. The more you do it, the flatter and straighter your part gets. No handheld power tool or blasting media can do that. Sorry, they just can't, and they won't. I want different surfaces of this cylinder head to flash like facets of a diamond when someone walks by and it's finished. And only these techniques are going to produce that effect on a part that was never flat or edgy enough to do it in the first place. Cast parts all distort differently in the molds as they cool down, and that's just a thermal property of the materials that they're cast from. These fundamental sanding techniques will put something onto the cylinder head that wasn't there to begin with, and using them in this focused, controlled way allows you to preserve everything else about what it is, how it's supposed to work, and how it fits. For rounded parts and non-flat centerpiece surfaces and parts, yeah, go ahead and blast away. In fact, you'd be a fool for not doing it that way. Thermostat housings, compressor housings, intake parts, those parts won't distort perceptibly because of their shape, and they're not worth all of this time and effort to achieve that result. Media blasters are an important part of every black belt's arsenal of weaponry. They're very powerful, and like all weaponry, they should be respected. My take on this has absolutely nothing to do with downplaying the use of weaponry. In fact, I encourage it. It has more to do with achieving a specific desired result. It's a time and place kind of thing. To get that show-winning result, I have to put something down that wasn't here. Something that weaponry is just too powerful to do. I encourage greenbelts to explore all options to hone their skills and advance themselves, but for the white belts who are inspired by watching my videos who have just begun their training, I don't encourage any of you to skip the fundamentals and grab weaponry for a part as important as the cylinder head, because it's a consequential part if you stray from this path and make a mistake. A flawless finish doesn't require the expensive compressors or the maintenance of a blasting cabinet. It takes a competitive greenbelt with $40 worth of sandpaper and a sink, and lots of meditation and training time. My advice is going to preserve the shape and flatness of your flanges, seal bosses, threaded bolt holes, and it's going to keep all that blasting media out of the internal passages. Your steel parts might rust a little bit, but you won't believe how much time, effort, and materials that we're going to save at the polishing stage for having done it this way. 8.5 hours, like an honest day's work with just enough overtime to get you wedged into the worst part of rush hour. You see a trend occurring now as we've achieved your green belt? That whole proficiency thing. The tools are suddenly easier to wield. We're getting more done faster. Yeah, let's keep that going. Step 7 is 800 grit. I'm still using the spreaders here. 800 is still coarse enough for planing, but you'd better not have left yourself very much of it to do by now. This step should take longer than the last because the step requires your highest level of scrutiny. Even though there's nothing new to learn after step 5, no new techniques, it's still the last step before it meets the polishing wheels. It's for this reason that you apply the most even, parallel-grained, planed and perfect finish that you can possibly create. There are no pits, scratches, blemishes, or bumps left on it if you did everything right, and if anything's left that's shaped weirdly, this is your last shot to fix it. You don't want to make any stray scratches or abrasions to have to clean up, but you will, and you'll fix it at the end of each side with the first tool that I showed you in step 5 that we made with that razor blade thing. This is not one of the many hasty, okay, let's plow through this job and mow the lawn stages just to do it again right over top of it. No. It's the final exam cut. Cover everything that can be reached, then use Jaffro's finest twisted sandpaper rolls to dig out the details and crevices. And then finally do the rolled up razor blade thing to straighten and blend all the textures. Smooth out all the oddities. Now, for full disclosure, you could have started polishing after 400 grit. But it's better that you don't on a centerpiece, and it's better that you don't if you're trying to go for the results that I've been talking about all this time. In order to get away with it, you have to use black rouge for the wrong reason. It depends on who you ask. In experienced hands that intentionally also use the wrong wheel with it, you can do this without damaging anything at all. In fact, you can make a stunning finish on aluminum straight from the blasting cabinet on every single part that's not flat. But linger for too long or apply pressure while polishing with black rouge, and you're permanently changing the shape of your part. Black emery compound is extremely aggressive. I keep sanding through 7 steps for 3 different reasons here. 1, the finer you go, the less maintenance it takes to keep the part shiny over time, and that's a big deal. It's going to be you who keeps it looking this good. 2, I end up with a truer, flatter surface that makes better reflections because it's been planed 2 more times. And 3, it takes less time to do the coarse polishing. That's a great deal. It saves you materials. I can tell you now, when we get to the coarse polish, the job is to bring out the shine and knock this meticulously created texture right off of it. There doesn't need to be any kind of spoiler. I don't need to hold back on that. All that matters on this cut is what you leave there as flat. All your curves are sanded smooth, and this is the stage of the job where all those defects that you couldn't sand through turn into character. Every cast's going to have its own cast-in blemishes and things, and while some of those are characteristic, they're all unique. You'll know when you're done on each side, and what's left behind sort of becomes endearing. The 800 grit finish loses the milky appearance. Objects close to the part will now show clear reflections. It'll begin reflecting its own self in the recessed corners. A glowing shine seems to pop from it now. You can keep going into the thousands of grit if you want to, but the polishing wheels and compounds are capable of taking it from here with aluminum. So the benefits of going further than this are outweighed by the time it takes to do them. The machinery for polishing is unavoidable and inevitable, and there are compounds that can do this work for you. All you've had to do is manually create the finish necessary up to the point where they'll work quickly and effectively. That's all I'm showing you here. This ridiculous standard that I'm holding myself to comes from a now defunct regional DSM club from the 90s to 2000s that held an annual car show / barbecue, including a raffle. And every year there'd be between 150 to 400 cars throughout the day, competing in multiple categories. King of Bling was one of the show categories, and in many ways it was like the gag gift to the show because this event brought every kind of build together in one place. Rally, road race, drag race, stereo builds, street cars, and even the purest stock OE crowd. You know, everybody could compete in any event. There was no second or third place to King of Bling. There's only one king each year, and it was like a presidency. Once you're deposed, they can still call you president. Well, you're still King of Bling. Your work got branded. And that's eventually what happened to me. I literally wouldn't exist as a YouTube channel today if not, and I'll explain that. I'm showing you my method for how I did it because it was my childhood dream to have a polished performance car. This happens to a lot of kids at a young age. It's not unusual. Growing up with a De Tomaso Pantera in the household and going to Polka and SCC shows with my stepfather, seeing ridiculous polished and perfect masterpieces of machinery in action has sort of set the standard for me. It was a dirty trick manual transmission mid-engine rear-wheel drive V8 powered monster, and knowing its sounds, smells, and the feel of that beast, chasing that kind of experience is an important part of my story of what made me pursue building engines in the first place. It's why I bought a DSM, whose drivetrain is also a dirty trick. Plus, it was an affordable choice. It was also convenient that DSMs were an overbuilt platform laden with lots of metal parts in the engine bay that take well to polishing and powder coating. Very little plastic. The mechanical education I gave myself was a necessary part of putting that whole dream back together. The DSMCA judges were DSM purists, and pretty much everything competing had a 4G series engine in it, so the field of competition was very tight. The category title meant that there were lots of polished, powder-coated, and even chromed parts everywhere, but whether we're talking about DSMCA, Concorso Italiano, Pantera Owners Club Association, or Concours d'Elegance, all of these shows, it's always been the hand-polished jobs that edged out the competition. At least whenever polishing didn't work against their score for originality. Our DSMs were judged every bit as stringently about fit and finish. It's hard to say that it's the hand preparation alone that does it, or the fact that the kind of a person that goes through all this much time and trouble to plane all the polished surfaces of his engine parts flat before polishing it leaves nothing else out of place or untouched. So ultimately, I didn't just succeed at creating my dream, even if 3 out of 9 of my trophies that I won were for King of Bling, a gag event, it still makes you want more. It also made me want several other cars that don't have this treatment done to it at all. Hello, Hyundai. This polished car thing was a dream that I wanted before I met anyone from DSMCA. They were just the crew who were talented, friendly, funny, and entertaining enough to give me the information, excuse, and motivation to go ahead and build my dream. I may own other performance cars in my lifetime, but I'm always going to own this one. Every drop of sweat or dollar I've spent on it has been totally worth it. To me. That is Harold H. Haluo. He's a middle-aged wolf spider that managed to escape being eaten by all the ladybugs in my garage. We've been hanging out for the last 3 steps. Yes, he's venomous, but it's not the spiders that you see that you need to worry about. It's always the spiders you don't see. I've already looked into all 8 of his eyes, and he looked back. He knows I saw him, and we have an agreement. But he just violated it. He's supposed to stay out of the shot. Anyone who does this appreciates everyone else who subjected themselves to this suffering and just to make a beautiful thing, It doesn't take money at all. It just takes a person who loves that thing. It doesn't even have to be a car either. Keith Fenner has a polished Bridgeport end mill named Buffy. There's a subcategory of hobbyists that like to make things shiny, and just know that this kind of finish isn't going to be the only thing that wins you the show all by itself. There are plenty of people who leave no thing untouched and everything in the right place, and you're going to find them in no higher concentration than at a car show testing their work. Their job with those judges and against that competition is not just to also touch everything. It's simply to touch one thing slightly better than everyone else did in order to make it stand out and separate them from the pack. All it's going to do is give you an edge against your other polished competition. You're still going to have to get everything else right, though. But if you touch everything else in a tasteful way and your finish is flatter, edgier, and shinier than your competition's, it's going to stand out. Plain and simple. And if you don't win, your job isn't to criticize this process as being a waste of your time. It's to scrutinize the winner's car and figure out what they did better. Judges can always explain their choices and decisions. Do that thing better and get your trophy next time, but I promise you it won't be this finish that you need to go back and fix. The bling in King of Bling was never intended to mean money. It was literally a polishing competition that let everyone compete no matter what finish they applied to their builds. There were a lot of polished parts in that club, lots of theme cars. I knew the people and the cars who won the event in previous years, and my build was a calculated attack on those judges from the very beginning. I knew how the event worked. The criteria for it were exactly like the theme of the build of the thing that I craved from the Pantera crowd as a kid, and I just, had just bought the perfect car to do it to. I wasn't going to polish a few accent pieces. I used that technique that the winners used all over everything on the engine that was aluminum. Only one other guy ever did it that way, and he held the title for many years. The DSM community just gave me the reason to build my dream. If I didn't win that competition with these exact same techniques and experience that success, both at shows and on the track, I probably never would have had a reason or the confidence to produce any of the videos I've ever made. Another thing is plain and simple. By no means is this the only way to make aluminum shiny. By no means is everyone who polishes anything doing it for a competition. Things get polished because they're loved, and every second you spend on preparation will show up in your final result. You may like the appearance of smurfed extrusions in the castings and don't care much about making straight mirror-like reflections. Your part might not even be flat and can't make mirror-like reflections because of its shape. It may be buried deep in a hard-to-see place. There's lots of reasons for not doing it this way, but if you have to polish a thing that's going to be scrutinized by purists, it's best to keep all that detail and fit as perfect as you can. This is not the fastest, but it is the best way to make all those easy-to-see places perfect and consistent before you begin laying down your final finish. You really don't have to do it the way I did it, but if polishing is your thing, polish it the way for however much you love it. If you're competing, know your competition, know your event, and know your judges. The people who win trophies at shows are the ones who will spend hundreds of hours getting finishes perfect. Know that for a fact. I feel that I've paid my respect to the original build with this work and to the DSM community's legacy by sharing my experience with it. They helped me perfect the thing that the show-winning Pantera owners would never explain to me when I was a kid. And they gave me a reason to do it and to enjoy it. This is now my empty canvas on which I'll apply my polishing work. Yes, it takes a long time to reshape rough cast metal with sandpaper, as you can see right there on the board. Yes, there is machinery capable of accelerating these processes. But this is the only method and the only part of the process that's going to give you complete and total control over what your finished product is going to look like. The final quality of your finish all depends on the earliest stages of preparation, and you'll see why that matters once we start seeing reflections. Huge big thanks to all of you on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for Step 8.